In a lavish London mansion, a sinister host invites 4 detectives and 4 suspects to a deadly game of bridge. When he's found stabbed, Hercule Poirot unravels a web of secrets where every bid hides a motive and every player a past. 1. Woman's desperate truth leads to murder, but can Poirot's keen mind reveal the killer before the final card falls? Chapter 1. The invitation. Hercule Poirot stood before the mirror in his Mayfair flat, his small, precise hands adjusting the silk tie at his collar with the care of a sculptor. His moustache, that magnificent emblem of his vanity, gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier, each hair aligned with military precision. He permitted himself a small nod of approval before turning to the matter at hand, a cream-colored envelope, embossed with a flourish, lying on his polished mahogany desk. The invitation within was as intriguing as it was enigmatic, penned in the ostentatious hand of Mr. Shaitana, a man whose reputation for extravagance preceded him. Mr. Shaitana, a collector of curiosities, be they rare artifacts or scandalous secrets, had invited Poirot to a dinner party at his opulent London residence. The note promised an evening of unparalleled entertainment and hinted at a guest list of peculiar composition, for detectives and for others described only as individuals of remarkable character. The phrase sent a prickle of anticipation down Poirot's spine. Shaitana was not a man to waste words on the mundane. His invitations carried the weight of design, and Poirot, ever attuned to the undercurrents of human motive, sensed a challenge. Veiled in the florid prose, he paced his drawing-room, the heels of his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor. The guest list, as outlined, was a study in contrasts. Among the detectives was Superintendent Battle, a stolid, square-jawed officer from Scotland Yard whose methodical mind Poirot respected, if not always admired. Colonel Race, a lean, sun-weathered intelligence officer whose travels had sharpened his instincts for intrigue, and Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, the exuberant mystery novelist whose intuition, though erratic, often rivaled Poirot's own. The other 4, Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, Major Charles Despard, and Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer, were less known to him. Shaitana's cryptic note described them as possessing talents most singular, a phrase that lingered in Poirot's mind like the scent of his morning tea. SANE. Dr. Roberts, he recalled, was a Harley Street physician, jovial and well-liked, though whispers of a past indiscretion clung to him. Mrs. Meredith, a young widow, was said to be delicate, her quiet demeanour masking a private grief. Major Despard, an explorer of some renown, carried the air of a man who had faced lions and lived to tell the tale. Mrs. Lorimer, a wealthy widow, was a fixture in London's bridge circles, her sharp intellect matched only by her sharper tongue. Why these 4? Poirot's grey cells hummed. Shaitana's game, whatever it was, promised to be as intricate as the man himself. He seated himself at the desk, his fingers tracing the edge of the invitation. Shaitana was a collector, yes, but not merely of objects. The man delighted in people, in their flaws, their secrets, their hidden sins. Poirot had met him once before, at a gallery opening, where Shaitana's dark eyes had glittered with amusement as he spoke of human nature as a gallery of masterpieces, each with its cracks. That night he had studied Poirot as if the detective himself were a specimen to be catalogued. Now this invitation felt like a summons to a stage. With Shaitana as both director and provocateur, Poirot's valet, George, entered with a tray of coffee, its aroma rich and grounding. "Will you be attending, sir?" he asked, his tone betraying no curiosity, though Poirot knew better. "But of course, George," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "To refuse would be to deny the little grey cells their exercise, and Monsieur he does not invite without purpose." As George withdrew, Poirot leaned back, his mind alight with possibilities. The invitation was a puzzle, its pieces scattered in the names of the guests and the promise of entertainment. He would go, not merely as a guest, but as Hercule Poirot, the man who saw what others missed. The game, whatever it might be, had begun. Chapter 2. The dinner. The rain-slicked streets of London glistened under the gaslights as Hercule Poirot's taxi drew up to Mr. Shaitana's residence, a grand Georgian house in Belgravia, its facade as imposing as a judge's gavel. The air was thick with the scent of wet stone and coal smoke, a fitting prelude to an evening Poirot sensed would be anything but ordinary. He stepped out, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the drizzle, and adjusted his overcoat with a fastidious flick. The invitation, tucked in his pocket, seemed to pulse with promise. Shaitana's game, whatever it was, awaited within. The door was opened by a butler whose impeccable demeanour rivaled Poirot's own. The man took his coat with a bow, revealing an entrance hall that was a testament to Shaitana's flamboyant tastes. Persian rugs sprawled across the floor, their intricate patterns glowing under the light of a crystal chandelier. On the walls, exotic artifact ivory carvings, jade statues, and a curiously sharp-looking dagger in a glass case competed for attention. The air carried a faint whiff of sandalwood, mingling with the promise of a lavish dinner. Poirot's moustache twitched. The setting was a stage, and he, Hercule Poirot, was no mere spectator. The butler led him to the drawing-room, where the other guests were already assembling. Poirot's keen eyes swept over them, cataloguing details with the precision of a watchmaker. Superintendent Battle stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders squared, his plain suit a stark contrast to the room's opulence. His face, square and dependable, betrayed a flicker of unease as he surveyed the gathering. Colonel Race, lean and bronzed from years abroad, leaned against a bookcase, his sharp eyes scanning the room with the alertness of a hawk. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, her apple-green dress as bold as her personality, was gesturing animatedly to no one in particular, her auburn hair escaping, its pins in a manner that suggested both chaos and charm. The other four guests, the intriguing personalities of Shaitana's invitation, stood apart, each an island of secrets in the room's glittering sea. Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, a portly man with a florid complexion, was laughing heartily at his own jest, his eyes crinkling with practised bonhomie. Mrs. Anne Meredith, a delicate figure in a pale blue gown, hovered near a window, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief as if it were her only anchor. Major Charles Despard, rugged and tanned, stood with the easy grace of a man accustomed to open spaces, his tweed suit faintly out of place amid the room's elegance. Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer, tall and stately in black velvet, held court near a vase of orchids, her sharp features softened by a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. Mr. Shaitana entered last, a vision of theatrical elegance in a tailored dinner jacket, his dark hair slicked back, his moustache as sleek as a panther's coat. His eyes, black and glittering, moved from guest to guest with the satisfaction of a collector admiring his finest acquisitions. "My dear friends," he said, his voice a velvet purr, "welcome to my humble abode. Tonight we dine, we play, and we reveal perhaps more than we intend." His smile was a challenge, and Poirot felt the air tighten, as if the room itself were holding its breath. The guests were ushered into the dining room, where a mahogany table gleamed under the soft glow of candelabras. The settings were exquisite bone china, silver cutlery, and crystal goblets that caught the light like prisms. Poirot took his seat, noting the careful arrangement. The detectives interspersed with the others, Shaitana at the head like a maestro poised to conduct. To Poirot's left sat Mrs. Lorimer, her posture impeccable, her grey eyes coolly observant. To his right, Mrs. Meredith seemed to shrink into her chair, her gaze darting nervously to Shaitana. The first course, a delicate consomme, was served with silent efficiency. Shaitana raised his glass, the red wine within catching the candlelight like a ruby. "Two secrets," he toasted, his voice rich with amusement. "To the stories we carry, and those we dare not tell." The detectives exchanged glances. Brow furrowed, Race's mouth twitched, and Mrs. Oliver's eyes widened with a novelist's delight. The others reacted with varying degrees of unease. Dr. Roberts chuckled, though his laughter rang hollow. Mrs. Meredith's spoon trembled, Major Despard's jaw tightened, and Mrs. Lorimer's smile grew sharper, like a blade honed by suspicion. Conversation flowed, guided by Shaitana's deft hand. He turned to Dr. Roberts, inquiring about his Harley Street practice with a knowing glint. "They say a doctor buries his mistakes, but yours, I hear, are few and far between." Roberts laughed, but his eyes flickered, as if searching for the trap in Shaitana's words. To Mrs. Meredith, Shaitana was solicitous, almost cruelly so, asking about her late husband with a sympathy that felt rehearsed. "Such a tragedy, my dear. One wonders what stories linger in the shadow of such loss." She paled, her voice barely a whisper as she murmured something about time healing wounds. Major Despard, less easily rattled, spoke of his expeditions with a clipped precision. But even he stiffened when Shaitana mused, "The jungle hides many sins, does it not? A man could vanish, and who would know?" Mrs. Lorimer, however, met Shaitana's probing with a cool deflection, her voice like cut glass as she turned the conversation to bridge her passion. "A game of skill, Mr. Shaitana, reveals character far better than words." Her eyes met his, unflinching, and Poirot noted the challenge in her gaze. Poirot himself was not spared. Shaitana leaned forward, his smile sly. "Monsieur Poirot, you collect solutions as I collect treasures. Tell me, what do you make of my little gathering?" Poirot's moustache twitched, and he replied with measured calm, "A most fascinating assembly, monsieur. Each guest, I think, is a puzzle in themselves." Shaitana laughed, a sound that echoed with private amusement, and Poirot's grey cells stirred. The man was playing a game, but its rules remained obscure. The meal progressed through pheasant, asparagus in hollandaise, a sorbet that cleansed the palate with tart precision. Shaitana steered the conversation with the skill of a conductor, drawing out hints of tension, of secrets unspoken. He spoke of human nature, of crimes unpunished, his words dancing on the edge of revelation. "Each of you," he said, addressing the non-detectives, "has a story I would dearly love to possess. A moment, perhaps, when you stepped beyond the ordinary." The room grew still, the clink of cutlery pausing. Mrs. Meredith's fork slipped, clattering against her plate. Dr. Roberts coughed into his napkin. Despard's eyes narrowed, and Mrs. Lorimer's fingers tightened around her glass. Poirot observed, his mind a kaleidoscope of impressions. Mrs. Lorimer's composure was a mask, her every gesture calculated. Mrs. Meredith's fragility seemed a shield, hiding something deeper. Despard's silence spoke of a man who trusted actions over words. Robert's joviality was a performance, too polished to be entirely genuine. The detectives, too, were alert. Steady gaze missed nothing. Race's casual posture belied his vigilance. And Mrs. Oliver's chatter masked a mind as sharp as Poirot's own. As the desserter decadent chocolate torte was served, Shaitana proposed his next act. "A game of bridge," he announced, his eyes gleaming. "A perfect mirror of the soul, don't you agree, Mrs. Lorimer?" She inclined her head, a queen acknowledging a gambit. But with a twist, he continued, "Our detectives shall play in one room, our other guests in another. A test of skill, and perhaps of nerve." His smile was a dare, and Poirot felt the air shift as if the evening had crossed an invisible threshold. The guests rose, their chairs scraping softly against the polished floor. Shaitana led them to two adjoining rooms, each set with a card table, the green baize pristine under the glow of shaded lamps. The detective's room was austere, its focus on the game unadorned. The other, where Shaitana would join the four personalities, was richer, with a fireplace casting a warm glow and a high-backed chair where Shaitana would sit, observing. Poirot, no enthusiast for bridge, elected to move between rooms. His role as observer suiting his purpose. "I shall watch, monsieur," he told Shaitana, "and perhaps learn more than the cards reveal." Shaitana's laugh was low, almost a purr. "I expected no less, Monsieur Poirot. The game, after all, is only the beginning." He clapped his hands, and the players took their places, the detectives in one room, the four suspects in the other. Poirot lingered at the threshold, his eyes catching the glint of the dagger in its case, now visible from the suspect's room. The firelight danced on its blade, a silent omen dot as the cards were dealt. The atmosphere thickened. In the detective's room, battle shuffled with methodical care. Race cut the deck with a flick of his wrist, and Mrs. Oliver fumbled her cards with a muttered curse. In the other room, Mrs. Lorimer's hands moved with the precision of a surgeon, while Mrs. Meredith's trembled slightly, betraying her nerves. Despard's focus was absolute, his movements economical, and Dr. Robert's hearty chuckle punctuated. The bids. Shaitana, seated by the fire, watched with the intensity of a predator, his wineglass untouched at his side. Poirot moved between the rooms, his small, neat steps silent on the rugs. He noted the rhythm of the game, the bids, the glances. Exchanged. Mrs. Lorimer's voice was crisp as she called her suit. Mrs. Meredith's hesitations drew impatient sighs from Robert's. Despard's silence was a wall, unbroken. Shaitana's presence, though he did not play, was a weight, his eyes missing nothing. Poirot's grey cells hummed, sensing the undercurrent of tension that no amount of polite chatter could mask. The evening stretched on, the clock on the mantel ticking with relentless precision. Poirot, standing by the doorway, memorized the hands, the scores, the subtle shifts in posture. He saw Mrs. Meredith's fingers twist her shawl, Despard's brief glance toward Shaitana, Robert's too quick smile, and Lorimer's unwavering focus, her eyes like steel. The game was more than cards. It was a battlefield, and Shaitana, Poirot suspected, was its architect. As the first rubber ended, Shaitana rose, stretching languidly. A pause, perhaps, he suggested, gesturing to a tray of coffee brought by the butler. The players nodded, some with relief, others with reluctance. Shaitana remained in the suspect's room, settling back into his chair, his smile enigmatic. Poirot, watching from the doorway, felt a chill. Not from the draught, but from the certainty that the evening's true drama was yet to unfold. The coffee was poured, the cups clinking softly. Poirot's eyes never left the players, his mind assembling. The fragments of the night, the glances, the silences, the weight of Shaitana's words. The man had invited them not to dine, but to dance on the edge of a precipice. And Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, knew that before the night was over, the masks would fall, and the game would reveal its deadly stakes. Chapter 3. The game begins. The drawing room of Mr. Shaitana's Belgravia. Residents hummed with the quiet intensity of a chessboard before a critical move. The air, warmed by the crackling fire, carried the faint scent of beeswax and the sharper tang of anticipation. Hercule Poirot stood at the threshold between the two card rooms, his small, precise figure a silhouette against the glow of the shaded lamps. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, darted between the players, absorbing every gesture, every flicker of expression. The bridge tables, their green baize surfaces pristine, were islands of order in a sea of unspoken motives, and Poirot, ever the observer, sensed the game was more than mere cards. In the detective's room, the atmosphere was brisk, professional, yet tinged with curiosity. Superintendent Battle sat with the solidity of an oak, his large hands shuffling the deck with deliberate care, as if each card held a clue to a case unsolved. His plain face, unremarkable save for its steady gaze, betrayed a mind that missed nothing. Colonel Race, opposite him, lounged with the deceptive ease of a man accustomed to danger, his lean fingers cutting the deck with a flick that spoke of precision honed in far-off lands. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, her apple-green dress a splash of colour against the room's muted tones, fumbled her cards with a muttered, "Oh, bother." Her auburn hair, escaping its pins, framed a face alight with the excitement of a novelist sensing a plot. Poirot, though no bridge aficionado, took a seat near the table, his notebook open, his pencil poised. He would watch, he had declared, and in watching he would see. The second room, where Shaitanas for intriguing personalities played, was a different world. The firelight cast long shadows, and the air seemed heavier, charged with a tension that prickled Poirot's skin. Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, his florid cheeks flushed with the warmth of the room, and perhaps a glass too many of Shaitana's fine claret, played with a joviality that felt rehearsed. His bids were bold, accompanied by hearty chuckles, but his eyes darted too often to Shaitana, who sat in his her-backed chair by the hearth, a silent monarch overseeing his court. Mrs. Anne Meredith, pale and delicate, sat with her shoulders hunched, her slender hands hesitating over each card as if it might burn her. Her blue eyes, wide with a nervousness she could not quite conceal, flicked toward the others, seeking reassurance or perhaps escape. Major Charles, dispored, his rugged features set in a mask of concentration, played with the economy of a man who had faced life-and-death decisions in jungles and deserts. His bids were curt, his movements spare, yet Poirot noted the way his fingers tightened on the cards when Shaitana's gaze lingered on him. Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer, regal in her black velvet, was the undisputed queen of the table. Her bids were crisp, her plays executed with a precision that bordered on ruthless. Her grey eyes, sharp as a blade, missed nothing, not the tremor in Mrs. Meredith's hands, nor the forced cheer in Dr. Roberts' voice, nor the coiled tension in Despard's frame. She was, Poirot thought, a woman who played to win, not merely at cards, but in life. Shaitana himself did not play. He sat, his dark eyes glittering, his long fingers cradling a glass of ruby-red wine he barely touched. His presence was a weight, a catalyst, and Poirot felt the man's amusement as a palpable force, stirring the room like a storm on the horizon. Shaitana's earlier words at dinner, his toast to secrets, and his veiled hints at hidden sins hung over the table, a shadow no amount of firelight could dispel. Poirot, moving silently between the rooms, noted the contrast. The detectives played with focus, their minds on the game but alert to the undercurrents. The others played as if their lives depended on it, each bid a step in a dance they did not fully understand. The first hand in the suspects' room was a study in character. Mrs. Lorimer, as dealer, opened with a confident one, spade, her voice cool and commanding. Dr. Roberts, her partner, responded with a jovial two hearts, though his glance toward Shaitana suggested his heart was not entirely in the game. Mrs. Meredith, hesitant, passed, her fingers twisting a stray curl of her dark hair. Disbarred with a clipped to spades, supported Mrs. Lorimer, his eyes fixed on the cards as if they were a map to uncharted territory. The bidding climbed, Mrs. Lorimer steering it with the skill of a navigator, until she declared a bold for spades. The table fell silent, the contract set, and the play began. Poirot, leaning against the doorway, memorized the sequence. He was no expert in bridge, but he understood people, and the cards were a mirror to their souls. Mrs. Lorimer's precision was a reflection of her disciplined mind, yet there was a fierceness in her play, a need to control. Dr. Roberts' flamboyant gestures masked a nervousness, his laughter too loud, his bids occasionally reckless. Mrs. Meredith's hesitations spoke of fear, not of the game, but of something deeper, something Shaitana's presence seemed to amplify. Despard's economy of movement was that of a man who trusted action over words, yet his occasional glances at Shaitana suggested a wariness bordering on hostility. In the detective's room, the game was less charged, but no less revealing. Battles, bids were methodical, each choice weighed with the care of a man sifting evidence. Race played with a gambler's instinct, his risks calculated but bold, his eyes flicking to Poirot as if to gauge his thoughts. Mrs. Oliver, predictably unpredictable, bid with a flair that confounded her partners, her exclamations, "Well, why not 3 diamonds?" drawing chuckles from race and a patient sigh from battle. Poirot, scribbling in his notebook, recorded not just the bids, but the pauses, the glances, the shifts in posture. The game, he knew, was a microcosm of the evening, each player revealing more than they intended. Shaitana moved between the rooms, his presence a silent thunderclap. In the suspect's room, he paused behind Mrs. Meredith, his voice soft as he murmured, "Courage, my dear. The cards reward the bold." She flinched, her card slipping from her fingers, and Poirot noted the flush that crept up her neck. To Dr. Roberts, Shaitana offered a sly, a bold bid, "Doctor, one wonders what else you dare." Roberts' laugh was strained, his eyes darting to the dagger in its case by the wall. With Despard, Shaitana was more oblique, commenting on the savagery of the game, a remark that drew a sharp glance from the explorer. Mrs. Lorimer alone seemed unfazed, meeting Shaitana's gaze with a cool bridge. "Mr. Shaitana is a matter of skill, not sentiment." Her words were a challenge, and Shaitana's smile widened, as if he had scored a point in a game only he understood. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 10, its rhythm a counterpoint to the soft rustle of cards and the murmur of bids. Poirot Moving to the suspect's room, stood near the fireplace, his eyes on the score sheet Mrs. Lorimer kept with meticulous care. Her handwriting was as precise as her play, the numbers aligned in neat columns. He noted the scores, not for their points, but for what they revealed. Mrs. Lorimer and Despard were ahead, their partnership formidable, while Roberts and Mrs. Meredith lagged, her hesitations costing them tricks. Shaitana, watching from his chair, seemed to relish the dynamic, his fingers steepled, his expression one of quiet triumph. Poirot's gaze lingered on the dagger in its glass case, its blade catching the firelight. It was an odd choice for display, too functional for mere decoration, too prominent to be overlooked. He filed the observation away, his mind turning to Shaitana's earlier words. The man had spoken of secrets, of crimes unpunished, and Poirot wondered if the dagger was more than a prop in his host's theatrical game. The thought was interrupted by a sharp cry from Mrs. Oliver in the other room. "Drat it, I've revoked," followed by Race's dry chuckle. Poirot smiled faintly, but his attention remained on the suspect's table, where the tension was, a living thing, coiling tighter with each hand. As the second rubber began, Mrs. Lorimer's bids grew bolder, her voice carrying a note of defiance. "3 no trumps," she declared, her eyes locking with Shaitana's for a moment before returning to the cards. Dr. Roberts, flustered, overbid, and lost a trick, his chuckle masking irritation. Mrs. Meredith, as dummy, set her cards down. With a trembling hand, her gaze fixed on the table as if afraid to meet anyone's eyes. Despard, silent and steady, played with a focus that bordered on predatory, his every move economical yet lethal. Poirot, watching, felt the rhythm of the game shift, as if the players were no longer merely competing for points, but for survival. Shaitana rose, stretching with the grace of a cat. "A splendid game," he said, his voice carrying to both rooms. "But the night is young, and the stakes, I think, are higher than you know." He moved to the detective's room, leaving a ripple of unease in his wake. Poirot followed, his steps silent, his mind alight with the patterns forming in his grey cells. The bids, the glances, the silences, they were pieces of a puzzle. And Shaitana, he suspected, was the key. As the players paused to reshuffle, Poirot lingered by the suspect's table, his eyes on the score sheet. He memorized the numbers, the hands, the sequence of play. Mrs. Lorimer's precision, Robert's bluster, Meredith's fear, Despard's intensity, they were all there, etched in the cards. Shaitana returned, settling into his chair with a smile that promised revelations. Poirot, standing in the shadows, felt the weight of the evening settle over him. The game had begun, but its true nature, he knew, was yet to be revealed. Chapter 4. Death at the Table. The air in Mr. Shaitana's Belgravia residence had grown heavy, as if the very walls sensed the shift from game to something far graver. The bridge tables, once the center of animated play, now stood like silent sentinels, their green baize surfaces littered with cards and score sheets. Hercule Poirot, poised at the threshold between the 2 card rooms, felt the prickle of his grey cells, alert to the undercurrent of tension that had woven itself through the evening. The fire in the suspect's room crackled, casting flickering shadows, while the shaded lamps bathed the players in a soft, deceptive glow. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 11, its rhythm a steady pulse against the growing unease. In the detective's room, Superintendent Battle was dealing a new hand, his movements as deliberate as a man laying out evidence. Colonel Race, his lean frame relaxed, but his eyes sharp, sorted his cards with a gambler's ease. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, her exuberance momentarily subdued, fanned her cards with a sigh, muttering about the complexity of the game. Poirot seated near the table, his notebook open but his pencil still, observed their play with half his mind, the other half attuned to the murmurs from the adjoining room. The suspects' table, Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, Major Charles Despard, and Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer continued their game, their voices low, their bids clipped, as if each card played was a step toward an unseen precipice. Mr. Shaitana, ensconced in his her-backed chair by the fireplace in the suspect's room, had grown quieter as the evening progressed. His dark eyes, once glittering with mischief, now held a contemplative gleam, as if he was savouring a private triumph. His wineglass, untouched since dinner, rested on the small table beside him, the ruby liquid catching the firelight. Poirot, glancing through the open doorway, noted the man's stillness, the way his long fingers steepled beneath his chin. Shaitana was no longer the flamboyant host but a watcher, his presence a silent pressure on the players. The butler entered with a tray of coffee, the clink of porcelain cups, a brief interruption. The players paused, stretching stiff limbs, exchanging polite murmurs. In the suspect's room, Mrs. Meredith rose, her pale blue gown whispering as she crossed to a side table to adjust her shawl, her movements nervous, almost furtive. Dr. Roberts, mopping his brow with a handkerchief, called for a refill, his joviality strained. Major Despard remained at the table, his rugged features set, his eyes fixed on the cards as if they held answers to questions unasked. Mrs. Lorimer, her black velvet dress absorbing the light, sipped her coffee with measured grace, her gaze sweeping the room like a general assessing a battlefield. Poirot, accepting a cup from the butler, moved to the suspect's room, his small, neat steps silent on the Persian rug. He stood near the fireplace, his eyes on the score-sheet Mrs. Lorimer had left on the table, its neat columns a testament to her precision. He memorized the numbers, the hands played, the bids called, sensing they held more than mere points. The dagger in its glass case, mounted on the wall, caught his eye again, its blade a silent warning in the firelight. He turned to Shaitana, intending to remark on the artifact, but the words died on his lips. Mrs. Meredith, returning to the table, let out a sharp, stifled gasp. The sound cut through the room like a blade, drawing every eye. She stood frozen, her hand clutching her shawl, her face as white as the lace at her throat. "Mr. Shaitana," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Poirot followed her gaze, and his heart quickened. Shaitana sat motionless in his backed chair, his head tilted slightly, his eyes open but unseeing. A thin trickle of blood seeped from a wound in his chest, staining the pristine white of his shirt. From the wound protruded the hilt of the ornate dagger, no longer in its case but buried in flesh, its blade gleaming cruelly in the firelight. The room erupted into chaos. Dr. Roberts leaped to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "Good God!" he exclaimed, his florid face paling. Major Despard was at Shaitana's side in an instant, his fingers probing for a pulse, his expression grim. Mrs. Lorimer, her composure a stark contrast to the others, stood slowly, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. Mrs. Meredith swayed, clutching the table for support, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Poirot moved swiftly, his small frame belying his authority. "Do not touch anything," he commanded, his voice sharp, enough to cut through the panic. The detectives, alerted by the commotion, rushed in. Superintendent Battle, His square jaw set, took charge at once. "Nobody leaves this room," he ordered, his tone brooking no argument. Colonel Race, his eyes scanning the scene, moved to the doorway, ensuring no one slipped out. Mrs. Oliver, her novelist's imagination already spinning, hovered near Poirot, her hands clasped in excitement and dread. Battle knelt beside Shaitana, confirming what Despard's silence had already suggested. "He's dead," he said flatly, his fingers careful not to disturb the dagger. Stabbed straight to the heart. No struggle, by the look of it. He glanced at the players, his gaze steady but piercing. "This happened during the game, while you were all here." Poirot, his eyes darting over the scene, noted the details with clinical precision. The dagger, now a murder weapon, had been taken from its case, which stood empty on the wall. The wound was precise, the blade driven with force yet accuracy, suggesting a steady hand. Shaitana's wineglass, still full, ruled out poisoner. Small mercy, Poirot thought, for it simplified the method. The score sheet, scattered cards, and coffee cups lay untouched, a frozen tableau of the moment before death. The fire, still burning, cast a warm glow that mocked the chill of the scene. "Who was out of their seat?" Battle asked, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. The suspects exchanged glances, their faces a study in guilt and fear. Dr. Roberts cleared his throat. "I was at the table the whole time, focused on the game. Didn't see a thing." His voice was too hearty, his eyes avoiding Shaitana's body. "Mrs. Meredith," her voice trembling, said, I stepped away to fix my shawl. Just for a moment. I didn't see anything." Her hands twisted the lace handkerchief, her eyes wide with panic. Despard, his tone clipped, said, "I got up to pour a drink from the sideboard. I didn't notice Shaitana until this." His gaze flicked to the dagger, his jaw tightening. Mrs. Lorimer, her voice cool as glass, said, "I was playing the hand. My attention was on the cards." Her eyes met Battle's, unflinching, but Poirot noted a faint tremor in her fingers as she set down her coffee cup. Battle's gaze swept the room. "No one left this room, correct?" Nods, hesitant and uneven, answered him. "Then the murderer is among you," he said, his words landing like stones. Mrs. Oliver let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth, while Race's eyes narrowed, his mind already sifting possibilities. Poirot, silent until now, stepped forward, his movements deliberate. He bent to examine the body, careful not to disturb the scene. The dagger's hilt was clean, no fingerprints, visible precaution that spoke of calculation. He straightened, his eyes falling on the score sheet. "Monsieur Battle," he said softly, "permit me to take this." He lifted the sheet, his fingers delicate, as if handling a rare manuscript. The numbers, written in Mrs. Lorimer's precise hand, were more than a record of the game, they were a map. Poirot sensed, to the moment of murder. Battle nodded, his attention turning to the dagger's case. "No signs of forced entry on the case," he muttered. "Whoever took it knew what they were doing." He glanced at the suspects, his expression unreadable. "We'll need statements from everyone, and nobody touches anything until we've searched the room." Poirot, slipping the score sheet into his pocket, moved to the doorway, his mind racing. The murder had been swift, silent, executed in a room full of people. The audacity of it was staggering, yet it bore the mark of someone who knew Shaitana's game, his hints at secrets, his collection of sins. The four players, each with a shadow in their past, were now suspects in a crime that felt like the culmination of Shaitana's dangerous dance. Mrs. Oliver sidled up to Poirot, her voice a whisper. "It's like one of my novels, isn't it? A locked room, a dagger, and everyone with a motive." Her eyes sparkled, but Poirot's smile was faint. "Madame, in your novels, the truth is dramatic. In life, it is often quieter, but no less deadly." He turned back to the room where Battle was issuing orders to the butler to secure the house. The fire crackled, the clock ticked, and Poirot's grey cells hummed. The game had changed, and the stakes, as Shaitana had promised, were higher than anyone had imagined. Chapter 5. The Four Suspects. The atmosphere in Mr. Shaitana's Belgravia drawing room had transformed from the charged anticipation of a bridge game to the cold clarity of a crime scene. The fire still crackled, casting its deceptive warmth, but the air was now thick with suspicion, each breath a silent accusation. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, his small frame a still point amid the chaos, his sharp eyes moving from face to face. The ornate dagger, now embedded in Shaitana's chest, had turned the evening's theatrical game into a grim reality. Superintendent Battle, his square jaw set like granite, had taken command, his voice a steady anchor as he directed the butler to seal the exits and summon the police surgeon. Colonel Race stood sentinel at the doorway, his lean figure blocking any thought of escape. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, her novelist's exuberance subdued, hovered near Poirot, her eyes wide with a mix of fascination and horror. The four suspects stalked: Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, Major Charles, Despard, and Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer stood or sat in varying states of distress, their faces a gallery of guilt, fear, and defiance. The bridge table, its cards scattered like fallen leaves, seemed a relic of a distant moment, its green baize now a stark contrast to the blood-staining Shaitana's shirt. Poirot, his hands clasped behind his back, observed the scene with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a flawed gem. The score sheet, safely tucked in his pocket, was a cipher he would decode later. For now, his grey cells focused on the suspects, each a puzzle piece in Shaitana's deadly game. Superintendent Battle, his notebook open, began the interrogations with the efficiency of a man accustomed to cutting through lies. "We'll take this one at a time," he said, his voice calm but unyielding. "No one leaves until we've got the facts straight. Dr. Roberts, let's start with you." Dr. Roberts, his florid face now sallow, mopped his brow with a handkerchief, his earlier joviality replaced by a strained attempt at composure. "Was at the table, Battle, playing my cards. Didn't see a thing, not a blessed thing. My eyes were on the game-tricky hand, that last one." His voice carried a forced heartiness, and his eyes darted to the body, then away, as if the sight burned him. Poirot noted the tremor in his hands, the way his fingers clutched the handkerchief like a lifeline. The Battle's gaze was steady, unblinking. "You didn't leave your seat, not even for a moment." "Not a step," Roberts insisted, his laugh brittle. "Ask the others. I was bidding 3 hearts when that poor devil was, well, you know." He gestured vaguely toward Shaitana, avoiding the word murdered. Poirot's moustache twitched. The doctor's protestations were too quick, too polished, like a performance rehearsed but not perfected. Battle turned to Mrs. Meredith, who sat hunched at the table, her pale blue gown pooling around her like a wilted flower. Her hands twisted her lace handkerchief into knots, her knuckles white. "Mrs. Meredith," Battle said, his tone softening but not relenting, "where were you when this happened?" Her eyes, wide and glassy, flicked to Shaitana's body, then to the floor. I stepped away, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, just for a moment, to fix my shawl. It had slipped, you see, and I went to the side table by the window. I didn't see anything, I swear. Her words tumbled out, each one edged with panic, and she pressed the handkerchief to her lips as if to stop herself from saying more. Poirot tilted his head, studying her. Her fear was genuine, but its intensity was disproportionate, as if the murder had unlocked a deeper terror. Her movements, he recalled, had been furtive during the coffee break, her eyes avoiding Shaitana's chair. Was it guilt, or merely the shock of a delicate nature confronted with violence? He filed the question away, his grey cells alert. Major Dispard, standing by the sideboard, spoke next, his voice clipped and precise, like a soldier reporting to a superior. I got up once to pour a drink. Whiskey from the decanter there. He nodded toward the sideboard, his rugged features impassive. I didn't go near Shaitana. He was sitting there, same as always, watching us. I didn't notice anything wrong until Mrs. Meredith screamed. His eyes, steady and unyielding, met Battle's, but Poirot caught the faint tightening of his jaw, a sign of tension held in check. You were away from the table, Battle said, his pencil scratching. In his notebook. How long? A minute, maybe less, Dispard replied. I poured, came back, played my hand, that's all. His brevity was a shield, Poirot thought, the mark of a man who preferred action to explanation. Yet his glance toward the daggers. Empty case suggested a familiarity with such weapons. A detail Poirot noted with interest. Mrs. Lorimer, seated with the poise of a queen, was the last to speak. Her black velvet dress seemed to absorb the light, her grey eyes cool and unflinching as she met Battle's gaze. I was at the table throughout, she said, her voice clear and measured. I was playing the hand for spades, if you recall. My attention was entirely on the cards. Mr. Shaitana was alive when we paused for coffee, and I noticed nothing unusual after. Her words were precise, her demeanour unshaken, yet Poirot observed the faint rigidity in her posture, the way her fingers rested too still on the table. Battle nodded, his expression unreadable. No one else entered the room. No servants, no visitors. The suspects shook their heads, their silence a collective affirmation. The butler, standing by the door, confirmed that he had been in the hall, attending to the coffee service, and had seen no one enter or leave. The room, it seemed, was a locked box, the murderer one of the four at the table. Poirot stepped forward, his voice soft but commanding attention. Monsieur Battle, if I may. He gestured to the dagger, still embedded in Shaitana's chest. The weapon, it is from the case. No fingerprints, I presume. Battle nodded, his eyes narrowing as he followed Poirot's lead. Wiped. Clean, he confirmed. Whoever did this was careful. Poirot's gaze swept the suspects. A careful murderer, then, in a room full of eyes. Most interesting. He moved to the dagger's case, its glass door ajar, the lock unforced. The weapon was accessible, yet not easily so. One must have approached it with purpose. His words hung in the air, and he noted the reactions. Robert's forced cough, Meredith's sharp intake of breath, Dispard's impassive stare, Lorimer's slight tilt of the head. Mrs. Oliver, unable to contain herself, whispered to Poirot, "It's like a stage play, isn't it? All of them acting, but one's the villain." Her voice, though hushed, carried, and Mrs. Meredith flinched as if struck. Poirot's smile was faint. "Madame, the stage is set, but the script is hidden. We must read between the lines." Battle, resuming his questions, pressed each suspect on their movements during the coffee break. Roberts insisted he had remained seated, joking with Despard about the hand. Meredith repeated her story of adjusting her shawl, her voice faltering. Under Battle's steady gaze, Despard confirmed his brief trip to the sideboard, adding that he had noticed nothing unusual about Shaitana. Lorimer, with a touch of impatience, reiterated her focus on the game, her memory of the bids flawless. "I recall every card," she said, her eyes meeting Poirot's for a moment, as if daring him to challenge her. Poirot, listening, felt the pieces of the puzzle shift. The coffee break, brief as it was, had provided the window for murder. The dagger, taken from its case, suggested premeditation, yet the act itself was bold, almost reckless, committed under the noses of 4 players. Shaitana's hints at secrecy. "Toast 2 stories we dare not tell," loomed large. Had one of these 4, provoked by his taunts, acted to silence him? Poirot's eyes lingered on the score sheet in his pocket, its numbers a silent witness to the moment of death. Battle concluded the initial questioning, his notebook filled with terse notes. "We'll need to search the room," he said, gesturing, to Race to assist. "And we'll need formal statements at the station. For now, stay put." The suspects nodded, their faces a spectrum of emotions. Roberts forced calm, Meredith's barely contained panic, Despard's stoic reserve, Lorimer's icy control. Poirot, moving to the bridge table, examined the scattered cards. The hand had been for spades, Mrs. Lorimer's bold bid. He recalled the play, her precision, Robert's fumble, Meredith's hesitation, Despard's focus as dummy. The moment of murder, he suspected, lay within that hand, hidden in the rhythm of the game. He turned to Battle, his voice low. "The score sheet, Monsieur Battle. It is, I think, a map to the truth. We must study it closely." Battle raised an eyebrow but nodded. "You see something in it, Poirot?" "Always, mon ami," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming. "The truth, it hides in the details." He stepped back, his mind racing. The 4 suspects, each with a shadow in their past, were now bound by a single act. Shaitana's game had ended in death, but Poirot's had just begun. Chapter 6. The Detective's Theories. The drawing room in Mr. Shaitana's Belgravia residence, once a stage for his theatrical whims, now felt like a courtroom, its opulent furnishings muted by the grim reality of murder. The fire had dwindled. 2 embers, casting a faint glow over the scene, where the body of the host still sat in his her-backed chair, the dagger a cruel punctuation in his chest. Hercule Poirot stood by the bridge table, his small hands clasped behind his back, his eyes sharp as they traced the room's silent clues. The score sheet, tucked in his pocket, was a weight against his heart, its numbers a riddle he was determined to unravel. Superintendent Battle, his square frame a pillar of authority, had dismissed the butler to guard the entrance, ensuring the suspects remained confined. Colonel Race, his lean figure poised at the doorway, watched the 4 Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, Major Charles Despard, and Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer with the vigilance of a sentry. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, her novelist's imagination, alight, paced restlessly, her apple-green dress a splash of colour in the sombre scene. Battle had concluded the initial interrogations, his notebook filled with the suspects' halting accounts. The room, sealed as tightly as a vault, held no trace of an outsider, and the dagger, wiped clean of fingerprints, spoke of a calculated mind. The coffee cups, the scattered cards, the empty case on the wall, all were pieces of a puzzle. But the motive, Poirot sensed, lay in Shaitana's cryptic taunts about secrets and sins. The detectives, now gathered in the quieter corner of the suspect's room, away from the body, exchanged theories with the cautious precision of players in a different kind of game. Battle, his voice low and steady, broke the silence. "This was no impulse," he said, his eyes flicking to the suspects, who sat or stood in uneasy silence. The dagger was taken from its case, used, and wiped clean, all while 4 people played bridge a few feet away. That takes nerve and planning. He rubbed his chin, his gaze settling on the score sheet Poirot had placed on the table. "You're keen on that, Poirot. What's it telling you?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his grey cells at work. "The score sheet, Monsieur Battle, is a mirror of the moment. The bids, the plays, the pauses, they revealed the rhythm of the game, and perhaps the moment when the dagger struck. I propose we recreate the hands, to see who was where, and when." His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of certainty, and Battle nodded, intrigued. Colonel Race, his tone dry, leaned forward. "I'll wager it's Dispard. The man's handled knives before. Those expeditions of his weren't all campfires and maps. That dagger's no parlor toy. It's a weapon, and he'd know how to use it." His eyes, sharp from years of reading men in dangerous places, lingered on Despard, who stood by the sideboard, his rugged features impassive, but his hands clenched. Mrs. Oliver, unable to contain herself, clapped her hands, her auburn curls bouncing. "Oh, but it could be Mrs. Meredith, don't you see? She's all nerves and fragility, but that's the perfect disguise. In my novels, it's always the quiet ones with the darkest secrets. Maybe Shaitana knew something about her husband's death, something she didn't want out." Her voice, though hushed, carried a thrill, and Poirot noted Mrs. Meredith's flinch, her pale hands twisting her handkerchief tighter. Poirot, his eyes gleaming, raised a hand for silence. "Each theory, Mies, Amos, has merit, but we must not leap to the conclusion. The truth, it lies in the details, the small things that betray the heart." He turned to Mrs. Lorimer, who sat with regal calm, her grey eyes watching the detectives with a faint, unreadable smile. "Madame Lorimer, you are the master of this game. Will you assist us in reconstructing the hands played this evening?" She inclined her head, her black velvet dress rustling softly. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. I recall every bid, every trick." Her voice was crisp, almost challenging, and Poirot noted the steadiness of her hands as she reached for the scattered cards. "Shall we begin with the final hand for spades?" The detectives gathered around the bridge table, the suspects watching with varying degrees of unease. Dr. Roberts, his florid face still pale, shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm. Mrs. Meredith, seated beside him, seemed to shrink further into herself, her eyes fixed on the table as if it might swallow her. Dispard, standing apart, crossed his arms, his gaze steady but guarded. Mrs. Lorimer, with the precision of a conductor, began to sort the cards, her memory flawless as she recounted the bids. "The hand began with me as dealer," she said, her voice clear. "I bid 1 spade. Dr. Roberts, my partner, responded with 2 hearts. Mrs. Meredith passed, and Major Dispard bid to spades. The bidding climbed to 4 spades, which I played." She laid out the cards, her movements deliberate. as if each one were a piece of evidence. Poirot, his notebook open, followed her recitation, his pencil sketching the sequence. He noted the moments of distraction. Robert's fumble when he misplayed a trick, Meredith's hesitation as dummy, Despard's brief absence from the table as he poured his drink. The coffee break, he recalled, had preceded this hand, providing the window for the murder. And during this hand, Madame Poirot asked, "Did you notice Monsieur Shaitana?" Mrs. Lorimer's eyes met his, a flicker of something perhaps passing through them. He was in his chair, as always, watching us. "I was focused on the game, Monsieur Poirot. Bridge demands attention." Her tone was even, but Poirot sensed a guardedness, a wall she had erected with care. Battle, listening, interjected. "The timing's tight." The coffee break was short. 5 minutes, maybe. Someone took the dagger, struck, and wiped it clean, all without being seen. That suggests they knew exactly when to act. His eyes swept the suspects, lingering on Despard. "Major, you were up for that drink. You passed close to the case." Despard's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. "I poured my whiskey, Battle. Didn't go near the case or Shaitana. I'd have seen someone else moving, and I didn't." His words were clipped, a soldier's report. But Poirot noted the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes avoided the body, Mrs. Oliver. Her voice, a conspiratorial whisper, leaned toward Poirot. "It's her, I tell you, Mrs. Meredith. Look at her, all trembling and innocent. She was fussing with that shawl, right by the case. She could have slipped the dagger out, waited for the right moment, and she broke off, her eyes wide with the thrill of her own theory." Poirot's smile was faint. "Patience, Madame Oliver. The heart of the matter is not in the who, but the why. Monsieur Shaitana, he played a dangerous game, teasing secrets. We must ask what secret was worth his death." His eyes flicked to Mrs. Lorimer, who had paused. In her reconstruction, her fingers resting on a card as if weighing its significance. Battle, practical as ever, turned to the group. "We'll need to dig into Shaitana's life. He knew something about one of you, something worth killing for. Any ideas?" His question hung in the air, unanswered. Roberts coughed, his handkerchief fluttering. Meredith's breath hitched, her face ashen. Despard's silence was a wall, and Lorimer's smile was a mask, unreadable. Poirot, stepping back, spoke softly. "I suggest, Monsieur Battle, that we examine the pasts of our friends here. Monsieur Shaitana, he was a collector of secrets, each of these four, they carry a shadow, I think." His words were gentle, but they landed like pebbles in a still pond. Rippling through the room, Mrs. Meredith gasped, a small, choked sound. Robert's laugh was too loud, too quick. Despard's eyes narrowed, and Lorimer's fingers tightened on the card. Race, breaking his silence, nodded. "Shaitana liked to play with fire. He invited us here to watch, didn't he? To see what would happen when he poked the hornet's nest." His voice was dry, but his eyes were alert, scanning the suspects with the precision of a hunter. Battle closed his notebook with a snap. "Right, we'll start with backgrounds, tomorrow records, histories, anything Shaitana might have known. For now, nobody leaves this house until the surgeon's done and we've searched the room." He glanced at Poirot, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "Anything else, Poirot?" Poirot's gaze lingered on the score sheet, now spread on the table. "The game, Monsieur Battle, it continues. The cards, they do not lie, but the players. They hide the truth. We shall find it, in time." He stepped back, his mind a whirl of impressions. Lorimer's precision, Robert's bluster, Meredith's fear, Despard's restraint. Shaitana's death was no accident, but a move in a game. He had orchestrated. Poirot, with his grey cells alight, was ready to play. Chapter 7. The bridge Clutha night had deepened around Mr. Shaitana's Belgravia residence, the rain tapping a relentless rhythm against the tall windows. Inside, the drawing room, once vibrant with the clink of glasses and the murmur of bridge bids, now held the chill of a mausoleum. The police surgeon had come and gone, confirming what was already clear. Mr. Shaitana had been killed with a single, precise thrust to the heart, the dagger driven by a steady hand. The body, covered with a sheet, remained in its high chair, a silent accusation in the flickering firelight. Hercule Poirot stood by the bridge table, his small frame a study in concentration, his fingers brushing the score sheet as if it were a sacred text. The numbers penned in Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer's meticulous hand were more than a record of tricks. One they were, Poirot believed. The key to the moment of murder, Superintendent Battle, his notebook tucked away, stood near the empty dagger case, his square face etched with the frustration of a man grappling with a locked-room puzzle. Colonel Race, leaning against the wall, watched the four suspects with the alertness of a predator sizing up its prey. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, her earlier exuberance tempered by the grim reality, sat on a velvet settee, her fingers twisting a stray curl as she muttered theories to herself. The suspects, Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, Major Charles Despard, and Mrs. Lorimer remained under scrutiny, their faces a spectrum of unease. Roberts' forced joviality, Meredith's trembling fragility, Despard's stoic reserve, and Lorimer's icy composure. Poirot, his grey cells humming, addressed the group, his voice soft but commanding. Misamis, the crime, it is audacious, we. A murder in a room full of eyes, yet not one sees the act. The answer, I believe, lies in the game itself, the bridge. It is a mirror of the mind. He held up the score sheet, its neat columns, glowing in the lamplight. This document, it tells us not only who won, but who was distracted, who was free, who was perhaps too clever. Battle, his interest piqued, nodded. You said we should recreate the hands, Poirot. Let's do it, Mrs. Lorimer. You've got the memory for it. Walk us through the last hand for spades, wasn't it? Mrs. Lorimer, seated with the poise of a dowager empress, inclined her head. Her black velvet dress seemed to absorb the light, her grey eyes sharp as she took the deck from the table. Indeed, Superintendent, the final hand was for spades, with myself as declarant. I shall reconstruct it as precisely as I can. Her voice was crisp, her hands steady as she began to deal the cards, her memory a steel trap. The other suspects watched, their expressions guarded Roberts with a forced smile, Meredith with a nervous twitch, Despard with a stillness that spoke of coiled tension. As Mrs. Lorimer laid out the cards, Poirot followed her recitation, his pencil scratching notes in his small, leather-bound book. I opened with one spade, she began, placing the cards with surgical precision. Dr. Roberts bid to hearts, a shade optimistic, perhaps. Her tone held a faint edge, and Roberts chuckled, though his eyes flickered with unease. Mrs. Meredith passed, and Major Despard supported with two spades. The bidding escalated, and I declared for spades, a contract I intended to make. Poirot, his eyes narrowed, interrupted gently, and during this hand, Madame, what was the mood? At the table, the distractions, the movements. His voice was velvet, but it carried a probe, and Mrs. Lorimer's fingers paused. Just for a moment, on the ace of spades. The mood was focused, she replied, her gaze steady. Bridge demands concentration. Dr. Roberts made a small error, misplaying a trick which cost us a point. Mrs. Meredith, as dummy, was quiet, her cards laid out. Major Despard was attentive, though he had stepped away earlier for his drink. Her words were measured, but Poirot noted a faint tightening of her lips, as if she were choosing each one with care. Battle, standing over the table, frowned. So, Despard, you were dummy during this hand, free to move, then. His tone was blunt, his eyes boring into the explorer. Despard, his rugged features impassive, nodded. I was dummy, yes. Sat there, watched the play, didn't move again. After getting my drink earlier. His voice was clipped, his eyes meeting Battle's without flinching, though Poirot observed the slight flex of his fingers, a sign of controlled tension. Mrs. Meredith, her voice barely audible, spoke up. I was dummy too, for that hand. I didn't do anything, just sat there. Her hands twisted her handkerchief, her pale face a mask of anxiety. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind was relentless. Her fear, he thought, was more than shock. It was a thread to be followed. Dr. Roberts, mopping his brow, added, I was in the thick of it, trying to keep up with Mrs. Lorimer's play. She's a devil at cards. Norin's rings around me. His laugh was forced, his eyes darting to the score sheet as if it might betray him. Poirot, studying the recreated hand, noted the sequence. Mrs. Lorimer's bold bid, Roberts' fumble, Meredith's passivity, Despard's freedom as dummy. The coffee break had preceded this hand, providing the window for the dagger to be taken from its case. But the act itself, the thrust to Shaitana's heart, had occurred during the play, when all eyes should have been on the cards. The bid of 4 spades, Poirot mused aloud. It was, perhaps, a distraction. A moment when attention was drawn to the table, to Madame Lorimer's skill. Mrs. Lorimer's eyes met his, a flicker of something wariness, perhaps passing through them. It was a calculated bid, Monsieur Poirot. I play to win, not to distract. Her voice was cool, but Poirot sensed a challenge, a wall she had fortified with precision. Battle, his practical mind cutting through the subtleties, turned to the group. Let's be clear, someone took that dagger, walked to Shaitana's chair, and stabbed him, all while you lot were playing. Nobody saw anything. His tone was skeptical, his gaze sweeping the suspects. Silence answered him, heavy and fraught. Roberts shook his head, his handkerchief fluttering. Meredith's breath hitched, her eyes fixed on the floor. Despard's jaw tightened, his silence a fortress. Mrs. Lorimer, her hands folded, said, The game, Superintendent, is absorbing. One does not look up to admire the scenery. Mrs. Oliver, unable to resist, leaned toward Poirot. It's her, I'm sure of it, Mrs. Lorimer. That bid was too bold, like she was pulling everyone's eyes to her. Perfect cover for a quick stab. Her whisper was theatrical, and Poirot's smile was faint, indulgent. Madame, the bold move is not always the guilty one, he murmured. But the cards, they do not lie. Let us examine the score. He spread the score sheet on the table, its columns a map of the evening's rhythm. Mrs. Lorimer and Despard had dominated, their partnership formidable, while Roberts and Meredith lagged, their errors marked in the numbers. Poirot's finger traced a particular line, the 4 spades hand. Here, he said, the moment of death, I think. The bid was high, the play intense. A moment when eyes were on the cards, or should have been. Battle, peering over his shoulder, grunted. "You think the murderer used the game as cover? That's cold-blooded." "Precisement," Poirot replied, his eyes gleaming, cold but clever. "We must ask who had the opportunity and who had the nerve." His gaze swept the suspects, noting their reactions. Robert's nervous cough, Meredith's trembling hands, Despard's rigid stance, Lorimer's unyielding calm. Race, breaking his silence, spoke up. Shaitana was playing with fire, inviting us all here. He knew something one of them couldn't let out. "That's the key, isn't it, Poirot?" His voice was dry, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the suspects with the precision of a man who had unraveled secrets in darker corners of the world. Poirot nodded, his mind turning to Shaitana's dinner. Conversation, his toast to secrets, his veiled hints at hidden sins. Monsieur Shaitana, he was a provocateur. He invited these four because he knew their shadows. We must learn what he knew. He turned to Mrs. Lorimer, his voice gentle, but probing. "Madame, at dinner, Monsieur Shaitana spoke of a dangerous truth he held about you. What was it?" Her eyes, grey and piercing, met his without flinching, but a faint tremor passed through her hands. "Mr. Shaitana was fond of theatrics," she said, her voice steady. "He hinted at many things, but he revealed nothing specific. He liked to unsettle people, was his amusement." Her words were a deflection, but Poirot noted the care with which she spoke, as if each syllable were a step on thin ice. Battle, his patience thinning, interjected. "We'll dig into their pasts. Tomorrow records, rumors, anything Shaitana might have used. For now, let's finish the reconstruction. Mrs. Lorimer, walk us through the tricks." She complied, her voice a metronome as she described each play, each card laid down. Poirot listened, his mind mapping the table. Lorimer at the helm, Roberts floundering, Meredith silent, Despard free to watch or act. The dagger, he thought, had been taken during the coffee break, but the strike came later, in the heat of the game. The score sheet, with its precise numbers, held the truth, and Poirot's grey cells were alight with the challenge of decoding it. As the reconstruction ended, the room fell silent, the suspect's eyes avoiding the covered body. Mrs. Oliver, her voice a whisper, said to Poirot, "It's like a puzzle, isn't it? All the pieces are here, but we're missing the picture." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The picture, madame, it forms in the mind, and Hercule Poirot, he will see it clearly in time." He stepped back, the score sheet a silent promise in his pocket. The game of bridge, now a game of truth. Chapter 8. Shadows of the past. The Belgravia residence of the late Mr. Shaitana stood cloaked in the pre-dawn gloom. Its windows dark, save for the faint glow of the drawing-room, where the air was heavy with the residue of tragedy. The fire had burned to ash, and the police surgeon's departure had left a sterile silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. Hercule Poirot, his small frame a beacon of resolve, stood near the bridge table, his fingers brushing the edge of the score sheet he had studied so intently. The covered form of Shaitana, still seated in his backed chair, was a grim reminder of the stakes of the evening's game. Superintendent Battle, his square face etched with determination, coordinated with a constable who had arrived to secure the scene. Colonel Race, his lean figure a shadow by the doorway, kept a watchful eye on the four suspects, who sat or stood in strained silence. Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, Major Charles Despard, and Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer, Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, her novelist's flair subdued by the night's events, perched on a settee, her eyes darting between the suspects as if seeking the villain of her next story. The reconstruction of the fatal bridge hand had sharpened Poirot's focus. The score sheet a map of motives and opportunities. The murder, executed with audacious precision during a game, pointed to a mind both bold and calculating. Shaitana's hints at secrets' dangerous game of collecting sins had provoked a fatal response, and Poirot knew the key lay in the pasts of the four players. Battle, practical and relentless, had agreed to delve into their histories, and now, as the night waned, the detectives gathered in a quiet corner of the room to plan their next move. "We need to know what Shaitana had on them," Battle said, his voice low, his notebook open on a side table. "He wasn't just throwing a dinner party, he was baiting them. Each one's got a shadow, and I'd bet my badge one of those shadows drove that dagger." His eyes flicked to the suspects, who were under the constable's watchful gaze. Roberts was mopping his brow, his jovial mask slipping. Meredith clutched her handkerchief, her pale face a study in fear. Despard stood rigid, his eyes fixed on a distant point. Lorimer sat with regal calm, her hands folded, her grey eyes unreadable. Poirot nodded, his moustache twitching as his grey cells aligned. "The clues." "Precisement, Monsieur Battle. Monsieur Shaitana. He was a collector of truths others wished to bury. We must uncover these truths, for one of them is the spark that ignited this crime." He turned to Race, whose worldly experience made him a valuable ally. "Colonel, you have seen men and women in many corners of the globe. What do you make of our players?" Race's lips quirked, his tone dry. "They're a mixed bag, Poirot. Despard's got the look of a man who's faced death before, maybe dealt it too, in those expeditions of his. Roberts plays the jolly doctor, but there's a crack in that facade. I'd wager he's covered up something messy. Mrs. Meredith's a bundle of nerves, hiding more than grief, I'd say. And Mrs. Lorimer, she's a cool one, sharp as a blade. If anyone could pull this off under our noses, it's her." His eyes lingered on Lorimer, who met his gaze with a faint, enigmatic smile. Mrs. Oliver, unable to resist, leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "It's got to be Mrs. Meredith. She's too fragile, too perfect, it's always the quiet ones. In my books, the widow with the sad eyes is hiding a scandal, maybe even a murder." Shaitana knew, and she silenced him. Her enthusiasm drew a sharp glance from Meredith, who seemed to shrink further into her chair. Poirot's smile was indulgent, but brief. "Madame Oliver, your imagination, it is splendid, but we must seek facts, not fictions. Let us begin with what we know." He turned to Battle. "What can Scotland Yard tell us of these four?" Battle, flipping open his notebook, shared what he had gleaned from preliminary inquiries. Dr. Roberts, Harley Street physician, well respected, but there was a patient, a Mrs. Craddock, who died under his care some years back. Official report called it heart failure, but there were whispers of an overdose, possibly morphine. No charges, but the gossip stuck. He glanced at Roberts, who was laughing too loudly at something the constable said, his handkerchief fluttering like a flag of surrender. "Mrs. Meredith," Battle continued, "widow of a Captain Meredith, who died suddenly 3 years ago. Food poisoning, the coroner said, but neighbors talked of arguments, debts, maybe something more. She's lived quietly since, but she's skittish as a colt." Meredith, hearing her name, looked up, her blue eyes wide with panic, her hands twisting her handkerchief into knots, Major Despard. Battle went on. Explorer. Big game hunter. Bit of a hero in the papers. But there's a story from his last trip to the Amazon. Our native guide went missing, presumed dead. Accident. Despard claimed, but the locals told a different tale. Something about a dispute over supplies. No proof, no case. Despard, standing by the sideboard, stiffened, his rugged features a mask, but his eyes flicked to the dagger's empty case. Mrs. Lorimer. Battle concluded. Society widow, husband, died in a fall down the stairs. A decade ago, accidental, the inquest ruled, but there were rumors of a stormy marriage, maybe violence. She's kept her nose clean since, but she's got a mind like a steel trap. Lorimer, seated with her hands folded, met Battle's gaze with a cool nod, as if acknowledging a chess move. Poirot, listening, felt the threads of the puzzle tighten. Each suspect carried a shadow, a moment Shaitana might have uncovered. These stories, he said softly, they are the collection Monsieur Shaitana spoke of. He knew something perhaps, a truth, perhaps a suspicion that one of these four could not allow to be revealed. He turned to Mrs. Oliver, whose eyes were alight with the thrill of the chase. Madame, you heard him at dinner, his talk of secrets. Did he say more to you? Mrs. Oliver, her curls bouncing, nodded eagerly. Oh yes, before dinner, when we were chatting in the hall, he said something about knowing a murderer who'd never been caught. He called it his finest acquisition, as if he'd bottled their confession like one of his artifacts. Her voice dropped, her eyes darting to the suspects. He was so pleased with himself, like a cat with a mouse. I thought he was just being dramatic, but now, she shivered, her imagination painting a vivid scene. Poirot's eyes gleamed. A murderer, he said. Most interesting. And he invited us, the detectives, to witness his game. He wished to provoke, to see who would break. He turned to the suspects, his voice gentle but probing. Did any of you speak privately with Monsieur Shaitana? Did he hint at what he knew? The response was a chorus of denials, each tinted with its own flavor of unease. Roberts, his laugh strained, said, he was all charm and riddles. Poirot never said anything straight. Meredith, her voice trembling, whispered, he asked about my husband, but it was just polite, wasn't it? Despard, his tone curt, said, he talked about my travels, nothing specific. Lorimer, her eyes like flint, said, he enjoyed his little games, Monsieur Poirot, nothing more. Poirot, undeterred, moved to the bridge table, where the reconstructed hand still lay. The game, it tells us much, he said, his fingers tracing the score sheet. Madame Lorimer, your bid of 4 spades was bold, almost reckless, for one so precise. His tone was light, but his eyes were sharp, watching her reaction. Lorimer's lips tightened, but her voice was steady. It was a calculated risk, Monsieur Poirot. The hand supported it. She held his gaze, her composure a fortress, but Poirot noted the faint tremor in her fingers as she adjusted her sleeve. Battle, sensing Poirot's direction, interjected. We'll check these stories. Craddock, Meredith, the Amazon guide, Lorimer's husband. If Shaitana had dirt, we'll find it. He glanced at the constable. Get me access to the yard's files first thing, and Shaitana's papers, diaries, anything he kept here. Race, his voice low, added, Shaitana's type doesn't collect secrets without leaving a trail. He'd have notes, maybe even taunts he sent to these 4. We should search his study. His eyes flicked to the suspects, as if measuring their reactions to the threat of exposure. Poirot nodded, his mind a whirl of connections. We, Colonel, and we must consider the psychology. The murderer they struck not in rage, but in fear of what Shaitana knew. This fear, it is the key. He turned to the suspects, his voice soft but piercing. One of you, Mies, Amos, carried a secret, too heavy to bear. And Hercule Poirot, he will find it. The room fell silent, the suspects' faces a gallery of masks, Robert's forced cheer, Meredith's terror, Despard's stoicism, Lorimer's icy control. Mrs. Oliver, her voice a whisper, leaned toward Poirot. It's like one of my plots. But real, you'll solve it, won't you? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The shadows of the past, madame, they cast long shadows. And I, Poirot, I shall bring them to light. Chapter 9. The Psychological Game. The first light of dawn crept through the heavy curtains of Mr. Shaitana's Belgravia residence, casting a pallid glow over the drawing-room where death had claimed its stage. The fire was long dead, and the air held a chill that no amount of opulence could dispel. Hercule Poirot stood by a tall window, his small figure silhouetted against the grey morning, his sharp eyes reflecting a mind in ceaseless motion. The score-sheet, now a familiar companion in his pocket, was a silent witness to the night's tragedy, its numbers a cipher to the moment when a dagger had silenced Shaitana's dangerous game. Superintendent Battle, his square face lined with fatigue, coordinated with a second constable who had arrived to assist in cataloguing the scene. Colonel Race, his lean frame restless, paced near the doorway, his eyes never straying far from the four suspects. Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, Major Charles Despard, and Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer, Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, her novelists. Exuberance now, a flicker, sat scribbling notes on a scrap of paper, her imagination weaving theories as intricate as her plots. The suspects, confined to the room under the watchful gaze of the constable, were a study in contrasts. Dr. Roberts, his jovial mask fraying, leaned against the bridge table, his handkerchief crumpled in his fist. Mrs. Meredith, her pale blue gown wilted, sat with her hands clasped tightly, her eyes darting like a trapped bird's. Major Despard, standing by the sideboard, exuded a coiled intensity, his rugged features set in a mask of restraint. Mrs. Lorimer, regal in her black velvet, sat with the poise of a statue, her grey eyes cool but watchful, as if she were a player awaiting her opponent's move. Poirot, his grey cells alight with the night's revelations, had proposed a new approach. The backgrounds of the suspects, Roberts' questionable patient, Meredith's sudden widowhood, Despard's missing guide. Lorimer's tragic husband had provided shadows but no clear motive. Shaitana's game, he believed, was not merely to provoke but to expose, and the key lay in the suspect's reactions to that exposure. We must play the psychological game, Mies, Amos, Poirot had said to Battle and Race, his voice a velvet probe. We must unsettle them, observe how they bend or break. To this end, Poirot had arranged a gathering, not at Scotland Yard, but in the more intimate setting of his own Mayfair flat, where he could control the stage. The suspects, under Battle's authority, were escorted there later that morning, their faces betraying varying degrees of apprehension. Poirot's flat, with its polished mahogany and orderly elegance, was a stark contrast to Shaitana's decadent lair. The drawing-room, bathed in soft daylight, was arranged with a small table set for tea, its delicate china a deceptive invitation to civility. The detectives Battle, Race, and Mrs. Oliver joined the suspects, who sat in a semicircle, there, postures stiff, their eyes wary. Poirot, standing before them, his moustache immaculate, began with a disarming smile. Mies Amos, you have endured a most trying night. But Hercule Poirot, he does not believe in chance. Monsieur Shaitana, he invited you because he knew something you wished to remain hidden. Today, we shall drink tea, and we shall talk, and perhaps the truth, it will emerge. His voice was gentle, but his eyes were sharp. Missing nothing, he poured the tea himself, his movements precise, handing cups to each suspect with a courtesy that belied his intent. As he did, he dropped hints, subtle as a breeze, but sharp as a blade. To Dr. Roberts, he said, "Your patients, doctor, they trust you with their lives. But a mistake, even one buried long ago, it can haunt we." Robert's smile faltered, his cup rattling slightly in its saucer. To Mrs. Meredith, he murmured, "The loss of a husband, madame, it is a heavy burden, but the whispers of others, they can be heavier still." Her face drained of colour, her hands trembling as she clutched her cup. To Despard he said, "The jungle, Major, it hides many things, guides, secrets, sins. What did Monsieur Shaitana know of yours?" Despard's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, but he said nothing. To Mrs. Lorimer he offered, "You play bridge with such skill, madame, as if life itself were a game." But what stakes did Shaitana raise? Her grey eyes met his, unyielding, but a faint flush touched her cheeks. Battle, seated with his notebook, watched the exchange with the policeman's. Patience, his eyes flicking to each suspect's reaction. Race, his arms crossed, leaned against a bookcase, his gaze like a hawk's. Mrs. Oliver, sipping her tea, whispered to Poirot, "You're stirring the pot, aren't you? Look at them squirm." Her voice held a thrill, but Poirot's nod was slight, his focus unbroken. To test their nerves further, Poirot proposed a new game, not bridge, but a staged reenactment of the evening's play. "Let us return to the cards," he said, producing a fresh deck and spreading it on the table. "But this time we shall make errors, to see who corrects, who remembers, who betrays themselves." He dealt a hand, deliberately misplacing cards, bidding out of turn, his eyes on the suspects. Mrs. Lorimer, her composure a fortress, was the first to react. "Monsieur Poirot, you've played the queen of clubs out of sequence," she said, her voice crisp. The hand would not proceed so. Her correction was instant, her memory a steel blade, and Poirot noted the intensity in her gaze, as if the cards were her refuge. Roberts, attempting levity, chuckled. "You're trying to trip us up, Poirot. I'm no good at this game, always." Mucking it up, but his laugh was strained, his eyes darting to the others, and Poirot saw the sweat beading on his brow. Meredith, her voice barely audible, said, I don't recall the hands so well. It was all so fast." Her fingers twisted her handkerchief, her eyes avoiding the cards, and Poirot sensed her fear was not of the game but of exposure. His movements economical, corrected a bid with a curt, "That's wrong. I played the ace of spades, not the 10. His precision was that of a man used to navigating treacherous terrain. But his glance toward Lorimer suggested a wariness Poirot found telling as the reenactment continued. Poirot dropped another hint, his voice casual. "Monsieur Shaitana, he spoke of collecting sins, did he not? A dangerous hobby to hold a mirror to another's soul." He watched their reactions. Robert's forced cough, Meredith's sharp intake of breath, tightened jaw, Lorimer's faint narrowing of the eyes. The teacups, now cooling, sat untouched. The room thick with unspoken truths. Battle, sensing the tension, leaned forward. "Let's be straight," he said, his voice cutting through the air. "Shaitana had something on one of you, something worth killing for. Anyone care to come clean?" His bluntness was a hammer, but the suspects remained silent, their faces masks of denial. Poirot, undeterred, shifted tactics. He rose, pacing slowly, his voice a soft cadence. "The mind, it betrays itself in small ways. The one who killed, they planned, they acted, but they cannot hide forever. The cards, the bids, the glances, they speak, and Hercule Poirot, he listens." He stopped before Mrs. Lorimer, his eyes locking with hers. "Madame, your memory, it is remarkable. You recall every card, every moment. But what else do you recall of that moment when Monsieur Shaitana fell silent?" Her hands, resting on the table, trembled slightly, a crack in her armor. "I recall the game, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but her eyes wary. Nothing more. The lie, if it was one, was expertly delivered, but Poirot's grey cells noted the tremor, the fleeting shadow in her gaze. Mrs. Oliver, unable to contain herself, whispered, "She's too perfect, Poirot. That's the sign of a mastermind." Poirot's smile was faint, his mind elsewhere. The reenactment had revealed more than card skills. It had shown him the suspects' nerves, their fears, their secrets straining to surface as the tea grew. Cold, Battle concluded the session, his voice firm. "We'll check Shaitana's papers, dig deeper into your pasts. Someone here knows more than they're saying." He glanced at Poirot, a silent acknowledgement of his ally's insight. Poirot, stepping back, felt the puzzle nearing its center. The psychological game had stirred the suspects. Their reactions are mapped to their souls. Mrs. Lorimer's precision, Robert's bluster, Meredith's fear, Disbard's restraint, each was a thread, and Shaitana's death the knot that bound them. As the suspects were escorted back to await further questioning, Poirot's eyes lingered on the cards, the score sheet a silent promise. The truth, he knew, was close, hidden in the interplay of minds and motives. Chapter 10. The confession. The late afternoon sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Mr. Shaitana's Belgravia residence, casting long shadows across the drawing room where the drama of the previous night had unfolded. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of extinguished candles and the lingering weight of murder. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure a beacon of order amidst the chaos of suspicion. The bridge table, its green baize now cleared of cards, stood as a silent witness to the fatal game. The score sheet, meticulously studied, rested in Poirot's pocket, its numbers a roadmap to the truth he was about to unveil. Superintendent Battle, his square face set with resolve, stood by the fireplace, his notebook closed, his eyes alert. Colonel Race, lean and watchful, positioned himself near the door, a guardian against any sudden moves. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, her auburn curls slightly askew, sat on a velvet settee, her hands clasped in anticipation, her novelist's instincts sensing the climax of the tale. The four suspects, Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, Major Charles Despard, and Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer, had been summoned back to the scene of the crime, their faces etched with the strain of a sleepless night. Roberts, his jovial mask all but gone, fidgeted with his cup, his florid cheeks pale. Meredith, her pale blue gown replaced by a sombre grey dress, sat with her hands knotted, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed to consume her. Despard, his rugged frame tense, stood with arms crossed, his gaze steady, but guarded. Lorimer, regal as ever in black silk, sat with her back straight, her grey eyes cool but watchful. A chess master awaiting the final move. Poirot had orchestrated this gathering with care, choosing Shaitana's drawing room to unsettle the guilty, to force the truth from its hiding place. The covered form of Shaitana, removed by the police surgeon but still a presence in memory, loomed over the room, its her-backed chair now empty. The dagger's case, its glass door still ajar, was a stark reminder of the act that had shattered the night. Poirot, his moustache gleaming under the soft light, stepped forward, his voice a gentle cadence that belied the steel beneath. Mise Amos, he began, his eyes sweeping the group. We stand at the heart of a puzzle, a game designed by Monsieur Shaitana, who played with secrets as a child plays with toys. But one secret, it was too dangerous, and it cost him his life. He paused, letting his words settle, noting the suspect's reactions, Robert's nervous cough, Meredith's sharp intake of breath, Despard's tightened jaw, Lorimer's faint narrowing of eyes. He produced the score sheet, holding it aloft, like a talisman. This, it is more than a record of bridge. It is a map of the moment when death struck. The hand of 4 spades, played with such skill by Madame Lorimer, was the stage for murder. Let us revisit it, He moved to the bridge table, spreading the score sheet and arranging the cards from memory, his hands precise. Madame Lorimer, you bid for spades, a bold move, one that drew every eye to the table, to your mastery. A distraction, perhaps. Harmon. Lips tightened, but her voice was steady. It was a sound bid, Monsieur Poirot. The hand supported it. Her grey eyes met his, unyielding, but Poirot saw the faint tremor in her fingers. A crack in her fortress, he continued, his voice soft, but relentless. During this hand, Dr. Roberts, you fumbled a trick. A rare lapse for one so experienced. Mrs. Meredith, you were dummy, silent, your hands free. Major Despard, you too were dummy, free to move, to observe or to act. He paused, his eyes scanning their faces. Robert's smile was strained. Meredith's breath hitched. Despard's stance stiffened. Battle, sensing the moment, stepped forward. We've checked your pasts, he said, his voice blunt. Roberts, that patient, Mrs. Craddock morphine, wasn't it? Meredith, your husband's death, whispers of poison. Despard, that guide in the Amazon, gone without a trace. Lorimer, your husband's fall, not as accidental as it seemed. Shaitana knew something about one of you enough to make you kill. The room grew still, the suspects' faces a gallery of masks. Poirot, seizing the moment, turned to Lorimer. Madame, your bid, it was not just bold. It was a curtain drawn to hide the act. You knew Monsieur Shaitana held a truth about you, a truth you could not allow to be revealed. His voice was a scalpel cutting through her composure. Hands, resting on her lap, trembled visibly now, her grey eyes darkening. What are you suggesting, Monsieur Poirot? Her voice, though steady, carried a note of strain, and Poirot pressed forward. Your husband, Madame, he said softly. His death was no accident. A fall, yes, but one you orchestrated, too. Escape a marriage that was a prison. Shaitana, he discovered this, perhaps through letters, perhaps through whispers. He taunted you with it, did he not? And last night, when he sat, watching, you saw your chance. The room was a held breath. Robert's cough was choked. Meredith's eyes widened in horror. Despard's fists clenched. Lorimer, her face pale but composed, rose slowly, her black silk rustling. "You are clever, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Yes, Shaitana knew. He hinted at it, at dinner, with his talk of secrets. He said he had proof a letter, he claimed, from a witness long dead. He would have ruined me. She paused, her eyes meeting Poirot's, and in them he saw not fear but resignation. "I took the dagger during the coffee break," she continued, her voice steady now, as if unburdening herself. "I waited for the hand, my bid, when all eyes were on me. It was a moment, no more. I struck, and he made no sound. I wiped the blade, returned to the game. It was necessary." The confession hung in the air, a stark truth in the opulent room. Mrs. Oliver gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Battle, his face grim, stepped forward, his voice firm. "Mrs. Lorimer, you're admitting to the murder of Mr. Shaitana." She nodded, her poise unbroken. "I am. He would have destroyed me, and I could not allow it." Her eyes, clear and unyielding, held a quiet dignity, as if she had played her final card and accepted the outcome. Race, his voice low, murmured. To Poirot, "You saw it in the cards, didn't you?" That bid, her control it, was all there. Poirot's nod was slight, his eyes still on Lorimer. The mind, Colonel, it betrays itself in the smallest ways. Her precision, it was her undoing. Battle signalled the constable, who moved to Lorimer's side. "You'll come with us, Mrs. Lorimer," he said, his tone formal but not unkind. She rose, her movements graceful, and allowed herself to be led away, her head high, her confession. A weight lifted, but a chain forged. The other suspects, stunned, remained silent. Robert's face was ashen, his handkerchief forgotten. Meredith's tears spilled, her relief palpable. Despard's shoulders relaxed, his eyes following Lorimer with a mix of respect and pity. Mrs. Oliver, her voice a whisper, leaned toward Poirot. "It's like the end of a novel, isn't it? But so sad, so final." Poirot's smile was faint, his mind still turning. "The novel, madame, it is never quite finished. There is always one more page to turn." He stepped back, the score. She'd a silent victory in his pocket, the confession a testament to the power of his grey cells. The game was over, but its echoes would linger. Chapter 11. The aftermath. The Belgravia residence of the late Mr. Shaitana stood silent in the waning light of the afternoon, its grandeur muted by the shadow of tragedy. The drawing room, once alive with the clink of cards and the murmur of bids, now felt hollow, its opulent furnishings a mere backdrop to the grim resolution of the night's mystery. Hercule Poirot stood by the tall window, his small, neat figure bathed in the soft glow of dusk, his sharp eyes reflecting a mind still sifting through the details of Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer's confession. The bridge table, cleared of its cards, was a relic of the fatal game, and the empty dagger case on the wall a stark reminder of the act that had ended Shaitana's dangerous charade. The score sheet, now folded neatly in Poirot's pocket, had served its purpose, its numbers a silent guide to the truth. Superintendent Battle, his square face etched with the fatigue of a long case, stood by the fireplace, issuing final instructions. To the constable who had escorted Mrs. Lorimer to the waiting police car, her departure, marked by a quiet dignity, had left a palpable void in the room. Colonel Race, his lean frame relaxed, but his eyes still alert, leaned against a bookcase, his mind turning over the events with a soldier's precision. Mrs. Ariadne, Oliver, her auburn curls dishevelled from hours of tension, sat on the velvet settee, her hands clasped as she scribbled furiously in a small notebook, already weaving the case into her next novel. The remaining suspects, Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, and Major Charles Despard, lingered in the room, their faces a mix of relief, shock, and unease, as if the confession had both freed and unmoored them. Battle, closing his notebook with a decisive snap, turned to the group. "That's it, then," he said, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of resolution. "Mrs. Lorimer's confession ties it up. We'll verify the details, Shaitana's papers, any proof he had on Herbert. It's a solid case. She acted alone, and she knew what she was doing." His eyes flicked to Poirot, a flicker of respect in their depths. "You saw it coming, didn't you, Poirot? That score sheet was the key." Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing on his lips. "The score sheet, Monsieur Battle, it was a mirror of the moment. The bid of 4 spades, so bold, so commanding, it drew the eyes, it hid the act. Madame Lorimer, she played not only the cards but the minds of those around her." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room, lingering on the empty chair where Shaitana had sat. But it was her precision, her control, that betrayed her. The mind, it cannot hide its patterns. Mrs. Oliver, her voice a mix of awe and excitement, leaned forward. "It's like one of my stories, Monsieur Poirot, the cool, calculating woman, hiding her crime behind a perfect facade. But you saw through it, those bids, her memory, the way she never flinched." She clapped her hands, then caught herself, her face sobering. Poor woman, though, to kill like that, to live with it. Poirot's nod was gentle, his eyes thoughtful. "Why, Madame Oliver, the tragedy, it is not only in the death, but in the heart that chooses such a path. Madame Lorimer, she acted to protect her secret, but in doing so, she lost her freedom." His voice softened, a rare note of compassion threading through it. "The human heart, it is a complex thing." Race, breaking his silence, crossed his arms, his tone dry. "Shaitana set the stage, didn't he? Invited us to watch his little experiment, poking at their secrets until one snapped. He got what he was playing for, in a way." His eyes, sharp from years of navigating intrigue, lingered on the suspects. "Lorimer was the one, but the others, they've got their own shadows. You saw that, Poirot?" Poirot inclined his head, his grey cells still active. "Indeed, Colonel. Each carries a burden, Monsieur Roberts with his patient, Madame Meredith with her husband, Major Despard with his guide. But only one felt the weight too heavy to bear." He turned to the suspects, who had been listening in strained silence. "You are free to go, mes amis, but the past, it does not forget so easily." Dr. Roberts, his florid face regaining some colour, cleared his throat. "A ghastly business, Poirot. I never imagined she'd do such a thing, Mrs. Lorimer. Of all people." His voice carried a forced heartiness, but his eyes avoided the empty chair, as if Shaitana's ghost still lingered. Mrs. Meredith, her grey dress, a stark contrast to her pale face, rose unsteadily, her voice trembling. "I'm glad it's over. I didn't know. I swear, I didn't see anything." Her words trailed off, her relief tinged with guilt, and Poirot noted the way her hands still clutched her handkerchief, as if it were her only anchor. Major Despard, his rugged features softening, spoke quietly. "She was a strong woman, Lorimer. Must have been desperate to go that far." His eyes met Poirot's, a flicker of respect in their depths, as if acknowledging the detective's skill in unravelling the truth. He turned to leave, his steps measured, a man accustomed to moving on from danger. Battle, turning to Poirot, lowered his voice. "You clinched it with that score sheet. Poirot, how'd you know it was her?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "The bids, Monsieur Battle, they were her signature. The 4 spades, it was not just a plate, was a performance, designed to hold the table's attention. And her memory, so perfect, it told me she saw everything, even the moment she struck. The mind, it cannot hide its truth from Hercule Poirot." He tapped his temple, his eyes gleaming with quiet triumph. Mrs. Oliver, rising from the settee, tucked her notebook into her bag. "I'm putting this in my next book, Monsieur but I'll make you the hero without the mustache, perhaps, to keep it subtle." Her laugh was a spark in the heavy air, and Poirot's bow was gallant, though his eyes remained serious. As the suspects departed, their footsteps echoing in the grand hall, Battle and Race lingered with Poirot. "We'll need her formal statement," Battle said, his tone practical. "But it's a clean case, thanks to you. Shaitana's papers might confirm what he had on her. Letter, maybe, like she said." Race nodded, his voice low. "She played a dangerous game, and so did he. Makes you wonder who else he was baiting." His eyes flicked to the departing suspects, a shadow of suspicion lingering. Poirot, his hands clasped behind his back, looked toward the window where the dusk was deepening into night. "The game, mes amis, it is never truly over. Each carries their secrets, and we carry the truth." He paused, his mind turning to Lorimer's confession, her dignity in defeat. "Justice, it is served, but it is not without cost." The detectives left the room, their voices fading as they discussed the next steps. Poirot remained, alone with the echoes of the night. The score sheet, now a relic of victory, was a reminder of the power of observation, of the small details that unraveled the human heart. He straightened his tie, his mustache impeccable, and prepared to leave, his grey cells already anticipating the next puzzle life would bring. Chapter 12. The final card. The twilight had settled over London, cloaking the city in a soft veil of indigo, as Hercule Poirot sat alone in his Mayfair flat. The silence of the evening, broken only by the gentle tick of a mantel clock, the opulent chaos of Mr. Shaitana's Belgravia residence seemed a world away, its grandeur and tragedy now reduced to memory. Poirot, seated at his polished mahogany desk, sipped a tisane, the steam curling like a question mark in the lamplight. His small, neat hands rested on the desk, the score sheet from the fatal bridge game now folded and tucked into a drawer, its purpose fulfilled. The case was closed, Mrs. Rhoda Lorimer's confession a stark resolution to Shaitana's dangerous game. Yet Poirot's grey cells remained restless, turning over the intricacies of human nature that had played out in that fateful room. The flat, with its orderly, elegant, polished silver, pristine linens, and a single vase of white roses, was a sanctuary of precision, a reflection of Poirot's own mind. He leaned back in his chair, his moustache immaculate, his eyes half closed as he reflected on the case. Shaitana had been a provocateur, a collector of secrets who had orchestrated his own doom. His invitation to 4 detectives and 4 suspects seat, with a shadow in their past, had been a gamble, a challenge to see who would break under the weight of exposure. Mrs. Lorimer, with her icy control and hidden desperation, had been the one to snap, her bold bid of 4 spades avail for the dagger's swift strike. Poirot's lips curved in a faint smile, not of triumph but of understanding. The human heart, he knew, was a labyrinth, and he had navigated its twists with the clarity of his method. He rose, his patent leather shoes silent on the parquet floor. and crossed to the window, where the lights of London glimmered like stars in a velvet sky. The other suspects, Dr. Geoffrey Roberts, Mrs. Anne Meredith, Major Charles Despard, had left Shaitana's residence unburdened by arrest, but not by guilt. Their secrets, though unproven, hung about them like shadows. Robert's patient, dead, under questionable care. Meredith's husband, lost to sudden illness. Despard's guide, vanished in the jungle. Shaitana had known these truths, or suspected them, and his game had been too prod until one broke. Poirot's mind lingered on Lorimer, her confession delivered, with the dignity of a queen sacrificing her crown. She had killed to protect her secret husband's death. No accident, but a desperate escape, and Poirot, though he had unmasked her, felt a pang of respect for her resolve. The door opened softly, and George, his valet, entered with a tray of fresh tisane, his demeanour as impeccable as ever. "A trying case, sir?" he asked, his tone neutral but his eyes betraying a flicker of curiosity. Poirot turned, his smile gentle. "Oui, George. A case of the heart as much as of the crime. Monsieur Shaitana, he played a game with fire, and it consumed him. But the truth, it is always there, in the small things, the bid, the glance, the tremble of a hand. He took the cup, its warmth a comfort, and gestured for George to leave. Alone again, he sipped, his mind replaying the evening's events. Superintendent Battle had praised the score-sheet, its numbers a silent witness to Lorimer's calculated distraction. Colonel Race had seen Shaitana's provocation as a soldier might, a tactical error that invited retaliation. Mrs. Ariadne Oliver, with her novelist's flair, had already begun weaving the tale into her next book, promising Poirot a fictional counterpart sans moustache. She had teased. But for Poirot, the case was more than a story. It was a study in human frailty, in the lengths to which one would go to protect a fragile truth. He returned to his desk, opening a small notebook where he had jotted his final thoughts. The Four Spades bid, Lorimer's masterpiece, had been the fulcrum of the crime, drawing every eye while her hand wielded the dagger. Her confession, delivered with such poise, had confirmed what the score-sheet whispered, a mind too precise, too too controlled to falter, yet driven by fear to a desperate act. Shaitana's hints at her past a letter, a witness had been the spark, and the bridge game the stage for her response. Poirot's pencil paused, his eyes distant. Justice had been served, but it was a justice tempered by the tragedy of a life undone. He closed the notebook, his fingers lingering on its leather cover. The other suspects, though innocent of this crime, would carry their shadows forward. Roberts would return to his patience, his joviality a mask for doubt. Meredith, her fragility a shield, would retreat to her quiet life, haunted by whispers. Despard, the explorer, would seek new horizons, but the jungle's secrets would follow him. And Lorimer, now in custody, would face her fate with the same dignity she had shown in confession. Poirot's heart, so often shielded by logic, felt a quiet sorrow for her. A woman who had played her hand and lost. The clock chimed its notes, a gentle reminder of time's passage. Poirot rose, adjusting his tie with the precision of ritual. The case was closed, the puzzle solved, but life, he knew, would offer new enigmas, new games to be played. He glanced at the mirror, his moustache a perfect arc, and permitted himself a small nod. "Hercule Poirot," he murmured, "you have seen the truth, and it is enough." He turned off the lamp, the room falling into darkness, and stepped into the hall, ready for whatever challenge the next day might bring.